My name is Connor Hayes. I'm 22 years old, and I live in Springfield, Ohio, a quiet town where the sound of church bells mixes with the hum of trains passing in the distance. But no sound in this world is louder than silence. I learned that when I was 7 years old, the day my parents left me behind. I still remember that morning like it's stitched into my skin. The sun was barely up, the air smelled like dew, and my backpack was sitting by the front door. I thought we were going somewhere together, maybe a trip, maybe a visit to Grandma's. Instead, I watched my parents drive away without a word, their taillights fading until all I could see was empty road. For hours, I waited on the porch steps, my little hands clutching the straps of that backpack like it could anchor me to something real. They never came back. The house grew colder, the light dimmer. By sunset, the truth settled in. I had been left, not forgotten by accident, but discarded by choice. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. When night fell, I curled up against the door and cried until my throat hurt. Every sound, the wind brushing the trees, the creak of the porch, felt like it was mocking me. But then, out of the darkness, I saw headlights sweeping across the yard. An old blue Chevy pulled up, and out stepped Margaret Hayes, my grandmother. Everyone in town called her Grandma Maggie. She wasn't just my father's mother, she was the woman who would save my life. She took one look at me, my tear-streaked face, my trembling hands, and her expression turned from heartbreak to fire. "Connor," she said, her voice steady, "you're coming home with me." She wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time that day, I felt the warmth of belonging. From that night on, her promise became my new beginning. Grandma Maggie lived on the edge of town, in a modest white farmhouse with creaking floors, a wind chime that never stopped singing, and the smell of cinnamon rolls that seemed to live in the air. She didn't have much, a pension check, a small garden, and a stubborn will that could move mountains, but she gave me everything I needed. Each morning, she'd wake me with a soft knock on the door and a plate of pancakes waiting in the kitchen. "Start your day full," she'd say, "and you'll face the world strong." She came to every school event, clapping louder than anyone in the crowd. When I brought home good grades, she'd stick them to the fridge with old magnets shaped like hearts and stars. But more than anything, she taught me how to believe in myself, not in a loud, motivational way, but through quiet strength. She'd tell me stories of working 3 jobs after Grandpa passed away, of raising my dad alone, of surviving storms with her dignity intact. "Hardship doesn't break you, Connor," she'd say, brushing the hair from my forehead. "It shapes you." And slowly, I began to believe her. We didn't have much money, but what we had was real. There were days when the pipes froze, when the old Chevy refused to start, or when dinner was just soup and toast, but those days didn't feel empty. They felt honest. She taught me that wealth wasn't about numbers in a bank, it was about how you treated people, how you faced the world when it didn't treat you kindly. There were nights I couldn't sleep, wondering why my parents had left. Maggie never spoke badly of them. She'd just sigh and say, "People show you who they are through their choices. Your father made his. But you, Connor, you'll make better ones." I held on to those words. They became my compass through the loneliness. As years passed, the ache of being abandoned dulled, replaced by something else, gratitude. Maggie had turned my broken beginning into a story of resilience. Our home, small as it was, became a place where I learned everything that mattered: how to cook, how to save money, how to keep my word. She even made me mow the lawn every Saturday morning, not because she cared how it looked, but because work builds character. We laughed often, too. She had this mischievous habit of hiding my shoes just to see me panic before school, then pulling them from behind the couch, cackling like it was the greatest prank in the world. On holidays, the house was full of neighbors, warmth, and the smell of pie. Maggie made everyone feel welcome. She said love wasn't meant to be rationed, it was meant to be shared. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit with me on the porch. The air would hum with crickets, and she'd say softly, "One day, when I'm gone, I want you to remember something: family isn't who stays by blood. It's who stays by choice." At 7 years old, I didn't fully understand. But at 19, I do. I thought that love, her love, was unshakable, something that would last forever. But life doesn't keep promises like that. 12 years after she rescued me, I found myself standing in front of a church draped in lilies, the air heavy with grief. Maggie was gone. And as I looked around at the faces gathered to mourn her, I saw 2 people I thought I'd never see again: my parents. They stood at the top of the church steps, dressed in black, faces hard and cold. After 12 years of silence, they had come back, not to say goodbye, not to seek forgiveness, but for something else entirely. They came for her money. The morning of Grandma Maggie's funeral felt heavier than the sky itself. The kind of gray that seeps into your bones, where even the air seems to mourn. I was standing outside St. Andrew's Church in Springfield, Ohio, tugging at the sleeve of a suit that didn't quite fit, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. Inside the church, the scent of lilies mixed with candle wax, and the soft hum of murmured condolences filled the air. People I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, old teachers, friends of Maggie, offered hugs and whispered words of comfort. Every face carried sorrow, but it was the quiet kind, the kind that comes from respect and love. But when I turned toward the front steps of the church, all that quiet shattered. There they were, my parents, Richard and Elise Hayes, the ghosts of my past, standing where they didn't belong. 12 years. 12 years of silence, not a letter, not a call, not even a whisper. And now, here they were, dressed in black like they'd earned the right to grieve. Richard's hair had gone gray, but his posture still carried the arrogance I remembered. Elise looked polished as ever, expensive black dress, pearls glinting at her neck, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. But even those couldn't hide the cold calculation behind her stare. For a second, I thought maybe I was imagining them. My heart stopped, then raced. But they didn't disappear. They began walking toward me, step by step, like a slow-moving storm. "Connor," my father said flatly, like he was greeting a stranger. My throat went dry. I wanted to speak, but words wouldn't come. My mother placed a hand on his arm and studied me like she was inspecting something. "You've grown," she said, her tone sharp and distant. "You look older." Older. Not different, not stronger. Just older, like time itself was an inconvenience. I nodded once, not out of respect but control. I wasn't going to give them the reaction they wanted. I turned, walked inside the church, and took my seat near the front, beside Maggie's framed photo. As the service began, I tried to focus on the words being spoken, the hymns, the prayers, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back. While I wept quietly through the eulogy, they sat like statues. Not a tear. Not a bowed head. The people around us noticed. I could feel the shift in the room, the whispers, the exchanged glances. Everyone knew the story. Everyone remembered how they'd left me behind. Their presence here was not seen as mourning. It was seen as intrusion. After the final prayer, I followed the pallbearers outside, my hands trembling as Maggie's casket was lowered into the ground. I whispered a goodbye so soft the wind almost stole it away. "Thank you," I said. "For everything." Then I heard their voices behind me. "So," my father said quietly to my mother, "what do you think she left behind?" My mother's response was sharp. "More than that boy deserves, I'm sure." The words sliced through me, quiet but deliberate. They didn't come to say goodbye, they came to collect. That afternoon, while people were still gathered at the reception, a man approached me. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a black suit that fit too neatly to be casual. His name was Mr. Raymond Grant, Maggie's attorney. "Connor," he said, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother requested that her will be read today. She wanted it done quickly, no delays, no disputes." I hesitated, my chest tightening. "Today?" He nodded. She was very clear about that. I agreed, though every part of me wanted to delay the moment. The last thing I wanted was to sit in a room with them. But I owed Maggie that much. That evening, I walked into Mr. Grant's office. The wooden panels, the ticking clock, the faint smell of coffee, all of it felt too still. My parents were already there, sitting across from one another, each wearing the same rehearsed expression of self-control. My father glanced at his watch impatiently. My mother crossed her legs, tapping her heel against the floor. They looked like two people waiting for a business meeting, not the reading of a loved one's final wishes. I took a seat across from them, forcing myself to stay calm. When Mr. Grant entered, he greeted me first, warmly, respectfully, and then turned to my parents with the kind of polite distance reserved for people he didn't much like. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We're here today to honor the final wishes of Margaret Hayes." My father leaned back in his chair. "Let's get this over with," he said, his tone bored. Elise adjusted her diamond bracelet. "Yes, we all know she had substantial assets. It's only right that her estate returns to the family." Her words hit me like a punch. "Return to the family?" I said quietly. "She was my family. Where were you when I needed one?" My father's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone, Connor. You're still our son." I met his gaze, steady. "No. I stopped being your son the day you drove away." The room fell silent. You could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Mr. Grant cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "If we may begin." He reached for a large sealed envelope on his desk, and I could feel the tension coil in my chest. My parents leaned forward slightly, greed flickering behind their calm exteriors. I sat still, my heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next would reveal the truth Maggie had left behind. My father smirked slightly, as though he already knew how the story would end. "This is going to be interesting," he muttered. But deep down, I knew Maggie. She never left things unfinished. And this would be no exception. The air inside Mr. Grant's office felt heavy, almost too still to breathe. The faint hum of the ceiling fan and the soft ticking of the clock were the only sounds. I could feel the pulse in my throat, the tremor in my hands resting on my knees. Across the table, my parents looked like they were sitting on thrones they thought they'd already earned. Richard's smirk was back, calculated and sharp. Elise sat upright, her posture perfect, eyes focused on the envelope as if it contained a winning lottery ticket. I sat between them both, the space filled with the ghosts of 12 silent years. Mr. Grant cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Margaret Hayes," he began softly. His voice carried the weight of finality. Richard leaned back with false confidence. "I'm sure we'll keep things simple, Mr. Grant." Maggie was sentimental but practical. Elise added, "Of course, we all know she wanted the estate to remain in the family. We'll see that it's managed responsibly." Her tone made "family" sound like a business term. I wanted to respond, to remind them of who actually stayed when everyone else left, but something inside told me to wait. Maggie had taught me patience. She believed truth always revealed itself when you stood still long enough to hear it. Mr. Grant looked at me for a brief second before carefully breaking the seal on the envelope. The sound of tearing paper filled the silence. He unfolded the document and began to read. My father's smirk widened. My mother crossed her legs again, anticipation glinting in her eyes. I sat still, my fingers tightening around the armrest. I wasn't nervous about what the will would say, I trusted Maggie. But I knew this was the moment everything would change. Mr. Grant's voice was calm and deliberate. "To my beloved grandson, Connor Hayes." The room went still. My parents' eyes flickered toward me, a hint of confusion breaking through their composure. Mr. Grant continued, "From the moment you came into my care, you became the son I never thought I would have again. Every sacrifice I made was for you, and I have never regretted a single day. You gave my life meaning when others chose to walk away." My chest tightened. Hearing her words was like feeling her hand on my shoulder one last time. But Mr. Grant wasn't finished. He took a breath and continued, "For that reason, I leave my entire estate, valued at $75 million, solely and unconditionally to you, Connor Hayes." The words hit the air like thunder. My father's smirk vanished. His face drained of color. My mother froze, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Grant's voice never wavered as he turned the page. "To my son, Richard Hayes, and his wife, Elise, who chose to abandon Connor when he needed you most, I leave $1 each. This is not an oversight, nor is it cruelty. It is a reminder that true wealth is not found in money, but in the love and responsibility you chose to throw away." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead light, the distant hum of traffic outside. But inside that office, time stood still. Richard's face turned crimson. He slammed his fist against the table so hard that the pens rattled. "This is a joke," he shouted. "She had no right, to do this. I'm her son." Mr. Grant didn't flinch. "Mr. Hayes, your mother was of sound mind when she prepared this document. These were her explicit wishes." Elisa's composure cracked next. She stood abruptly, voice trembling but sharp. "After everything we gave her, after all those years, she chooses him? Over us?" I stood slowly, my voice calm but steady. "She chose me because I was there. Because I loved her. Because when you left, she stayed." My mother turned toward me, eyes flashing with anger. "You think you deserve this? You were a child, she spoiled you with guilt. We built this family long before she interfered." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because of how wrong they were. "You built nothing," I said quietly. "You walked away from everything." My father pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're just a kid, Connor. You don't know what to do with that kind of money. You'll waste it. You'll ruin her legacy." I met his glare. "You already did that when you left." Mr. Grant closed the document gently. "The will is final," he said firmly. "Any attempt to contest it will be futile. Your mother's wishes are legally binding." My father looked ready to explode, but my mother grabbed his arm. For a second, I thought it was to calm him, but I saw the truth in her eyes. It wasn't sorrow. It was calculation. Even in defeat, she was already thinking of another way to take what wasn't hers. She leaned toward him and whispered, "Let's go." They both rose, collected their things, and stormed out. The door slammed behind them, echoing down the hall. When the sound faded, the silence that followed was peaceful. Mr. Grant rested a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother believed in you, Connor. She wanted you to have not just her money, but her freedom. Her trust." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She gave me everything," I whispered. "Even now." He smiled softly. "She knew you'd use it wisely. You're your grandmother's grandson, through and through. I left the office that evening feeling a strange mix of grief and peace. The sun was setting over downtown Springfield, painting the sky in gold and crimson. For years, I'd carried the weight of abandonment. But now, standing in the cool evening air, I realized something: I wasn't broken. I had survived. And Maggie had made sure I'd never be powerless again. The people who left me behind had returned, expecting to find a boy still waiting on the porch. But what they found instead was a man, one raised by love, not by blood. And Maggie's final act had made that truth undeniable. When I stepped outside Mr. Grant's office that evening, the streets of Springfield were soaked in gold. The last light of day stretched across the pavement, long and soft, like a curtain closing on an old play. My parents' angry voices echoed faintly down the hallway behind me, fading with every step I took toward the open air. For the first time since I was 7, their noise no longer reached me. The breeze carried the smell of rain and lilacs from the small park across the street. I stood there for a moment, hands trembling, heart still racing. The truth had been spoken, sealed, and witnessed. Maggie had done what she always promised: she protected me, even when she wasn't here to hold my hand. I took a slow breath and whispered, "Thank you." The following days passed in a strange blur. Neighbors came by the house with casseroles and flowers, telling stories about Maggie I had never heard: how she paid for a neighbor's medicine one winter, how she bought groceries for a single mother who had lost her job, how she secretly knitted blankets for the shelter downtown. Each story was a piece of her I didn't know I'd been missing. And every time someone said her name, the ache in my chest deepened. At night, I would sit on the porch where she and I had watched 1,000 sunsets together. The wooden swing creaked under my weight, the same one she used to rock me to sleep in when storms rolled through. Now the storms were silent ones, memories, what-ifs, unfinished conversations. I missed her laughter most. It had this way of filling every corner of the house. Without it, the rooms felt too large, too empty. But even in the quiet, she was still everywhere. The smell of cinnamon in the kitchen. The old radio on the counter. The framed photo of us smiling at the county fair. She had left a life full of reminders that love doesn't vanish, it lingers. It didn't take long for the phone calls to start. First came the angry ones. My father's voice, clipped and furious. "Connor, you can't possibly think this is over. That money belongs to the family." Then the pleading ones. My mother's voice, soft and desperate. "Sweetheart, we made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Let's talk. We could help you manage things, keep it safe." Every message ended the same way, manipulation wrapped in guilt. But I didn't answer. The boy who once waited on the porch for headlights to appear no longer existed. I had learned something Maggie always tried to teach me: silence can be strength. Still, part of me hurt listening to those voicemails. Some wounds don't close neatly, they just stop bleeding. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, Mr. Grant called. "Connor," he said, his voice steady, "there's one more thing your grandmother wanted me to tell you." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "She asked that you not see the inheritance as a burden but as a tool. In her words, I want Connor to use this money to do what I couldn't do alone, make the world a little softer for someone else." His words settled like sunlight through clouds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room of the house, thinking about what she'd said. I ran my fingers along the wooden banister she used to grip. I paused at the window where she watered her plants every morning. I realized she hadn't just left me wealth, she had left me direction. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Grant's office again. The roads were quiet, the fields misted over with dew. When I arrived, I told him what I had decided. "I want to set up a scholarship," I said. "For kids who grew up like me, without parents, without a safety net. I want them to know that someone believes in them." Mr. Grant smiled faintly. "She'd be proud of that." And, I added, "I want part of it to go to the shelters Maggie supported. Food banks, church programs, the same ones she volunteered at." We spent hours drafting the paperwork. It felt right, like every signature brought me closer to her. By the end, the weight on my chest had lifted just enough to breathe again. In the weeks that followed, letters started arriving from people who had heard about the fund. One from a high school counselor in Dayton thanking me for giving her students hope. Another from a young mother whose son had received the first scholarship award. Each envelope carried a piece of what Maggie had left behind, not her money, but her kindness. My parents tried again, of course. A few letters full of apologies written in expensive stationery. But the words were hollow, like echoes in an empty room. I didn't need revenge. Their absence was punishment enough. Instead, I focused on building the life Maggie wanted for me: simple, steady, meaningful. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit on that same porch swing, the one that creaks when the wind changes. I imagine Maggie sitting beside me, hands folded on her lap, smiling that knowing smile. "I told you, Connor," she'd whisper. "You're stronger than you know." And I'd whisper back, "You were right, Grandma." Because her love hadn't just saved me. It had taught me what to do with the pieces of a broken past. You don't throw them away. You build something better with them. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The first snowfall of winter came early that year in Springfield, Ohio. I remember standing by the window of Maggie's old farmhouse, watching the flakes drift lazily through the air, settling on the fences and fields she loved so much. The world looked soft again, quiet, almost forgiving. It felt like she was still here, in the hush between each falling snowflake. 3 months had passed since the will reading, and life had slowly found its rhythm again. I still caught myself expecting to hear her footsteps in the kitchen or her voice humming an old song as she stirred her coffee. Grief has a way of sneaking up on you, not always as pain, but sometimes as a memory that refuses to fade. But in that quiet, something new had begun to grow: purpose. The Margaret Hayes Foundation had officially launched 2 weeks earlier. Scholarships for foster kids and teens without parents were already being processed. Local newspapers wrote small pieces about it, calling it a legacy of love built from loss. Every letter that came in, every thank you note from families I'd never met, made me realize something: Maggie hadn't just given me a fortune. She had handed me a mission. The day we opened the foundation office downtown, I placed her photo on the front desk. It was the one where she was laughing, her eyes crinkled, holding a pie she'd just baked. The volunteers and I stood around it silently for a moment before cutting the ribbon. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like her story was still unfolding, through every child who'd get a chance, every home that wouldn't go hungry. When I looked out at the small crowd that day, teachers, church members, old friends, I realized what true wealth really looked like. It wasn't in the number written in a bank ledger. It was in the lives she'd touched, and now, in the ones I'd get to touch too. My parents, of course, had tried to reach me again. Letters came in the mail with familiar handwriting, some begging for forgiveness, some wrapped in guilt, others disguised as affection. I never responded. There was no hate left in me, only understanding, the kind that comes with distance. They had chosen their path long before I was old enough to understand it. And I had finally chosen mine. The last voicemail they left was a quiet one. My father's voice, tired, almost hollow. "Connor, if she could see you now, maybe she was right about you." Then silence. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply, either. Some words are meant to stay suspended, not forgiven, not forgotten, just done. One evening, I returned to the farmhouse. The snow had piled up on the porch railings, and the old wind chime Maggie loved clinked softly in the wind. I lit a fire in the living room, the same way she used to on winter nights, and sat with a cup of tea she would have approved of, strong and slightly too sweet. Around me were traces of her life: the knitting basket by the couch, the old station wagon key hanging by the door, her reading glasses still resting on the side table. I realized something in that moment. She hadn't left me alone. She'd left me surrounded. Every object, every memory, every lesson, they were all her way of staying. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch. The stars shimmered faintly behind the clouds, and the snow glowed under the moonlight. I sat down on the swing, the wood creaking beneath me just like it used to. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Grandma. For loving me when no one else did. For believing I could stand on my own. For showing me that love doesn't end, it just changes shape." A single snowflake landed on my palm. I watched it melt slowly, smiling through the tears I didn't bother to wipe away. That night, I wrote my first annual letter for the Foundation's records, a tradition I plan to continue every year. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a conversation with her. "You taught me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift others. You taught me that love, when it's given freely, becomes legacy. This foundation isn't about money, Grandma, it's about you. About every child you would have helped if you had more time. I'll keep going for you." When I finished, I placed the letter inside her old recipe box, the same one that had once held cinnamon cards and family secrets. It felt right. She had always mixed sweetness with wisdom. Sometimes I still dream of that porch, not the day I was left behind, but the day she found me. The headlights, the warmth of her hands, the promise she made. She kept it. And now, in a way I never could have imagined, so did I. Because what she gave me was never just a home or safety. It was strength. It was love that endured the silence. It was proof that blood may tie us together, but love is what keeps us bound. And even now, when the wind brushes past the porch at night, I swear I can hear her voice whisper through the chimes. "You did good, Connor. You did good." And that's all I ever needed to hear. Tell me in the comments below, I want to hear your thoughts. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications.